The God of the Bible is famous for mercy. He forgave murderers. He pardoned thieves. He forgave the very men who hammered iron through the flesh of his Son. Blood washed away blood. Mercy flowed like water. But there was one line he would not cross. There was one specific nation he refused to ever forgive: the Amalekites. They were not just a military enemy. They were a cosmic infection. They did not fight like men. They hunted like predators. They cowardly attacked the sick. They slaughtered the elderly. They targeted the defenseless, hunting pregnant women, dragging exhausted children through the burning desert sand. It was not war. It was predatory terrorism. God's response was immediate. It was absolute. He issued a decree unlike anything else in the entirety of Scripture. Total erasure from human history. No mercy, no prisoners, no exceptions. Every man, woman, child, and beast wiped from the face of the earth. Why? Why does the God of absolute love issue a 1,000-year death sentence against one specific bloodline? Today, you are going to find out. And the truth you discover will not stay buried in the ancient sand. Because the exact same spirit that made God refuse to forgive Amalek is not dead. It is breathing. It is operating today. It is watching you. This is the real story of the most terrifying nation in the ancient world. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what made Amalek so uniquely, unspeakably evil, and why their spirit is still the most dangerous enemy you will ever face. To understand the curse, you must understand the world they broke. Step back into the late Bronze Age. Look at the world immediately after the Exodus. Egypt was not a minor regional power. Egypt was the undisputed superpower of the known world, the apex of human achievement. They possessed the most advanced economy. They built impenetrable fortified cities. Their military was a flawless, mechanized machine of death. And the God of a nation of slaves had just broken them, catastrophically, publicly. 10 plagues descended from the sky: blood, frogs, darkness that could be felt, fire mixed with ice. It was not random nature. It was a surgical dismantling of Egyptian theology. God executed their deities one by one, exposing them as nothing but stone and silence. Then came the water. The Red Sea split open, 2 towering walls of churning sapphire. The Israelites walked through the dry abyss. The Egyptian Empire followed. The most elite chariot force in the ancient world, bronze, gold, and muscle, charging into the deep. Then God closed his hand. The water collapsed. The greatest army on earth was swallowed in a single, silent afternoon. The chariots of iron sank like lead. The shockwave from that event shattered the ancient Near East. Archaeological records of the late Bronze Age hint at sudden, unnatural panics among empires. The Bible records the psychological terror perfectly. The Canaanites heard the news, and their hearts melted like wax. The Moabites were paralyzed with dread. The warlords of Philistia trembled behind their massive stone walls. Every king, every general, every pagan priest, they all received the report. They looked at the bloated bodies of Egyptian elite washing up on the shore, and they understood one absolute truth with crystal clarity. There was a God moving through that desert. He was walking with 2 million former slaves, and that God was not to be tested. Every nation understood that. Every nation was terrified. The world held its breath. Ancient Jewish tradition, the Midrash, records a chilling metaphor for this exact moment. The fear of God was a boiling bath. It was so hot, so terrifying, that no nation on earth dared to touch it. But Amalek did not care. Amalek jumped in. They marched straight into the scorching desert to pick a fight with the divine. They knew the bath would burn them. They knew they would be destroyed. But they jumped into the boiling water anyway, just to cool it down for everyone else. They wanted to prove to the trembling world that this invincible God could bleed. They did not challenge the warriors at the front. They did not send a formal declaration of war. They circled behind the Israelite column, like jackals, like predators separating the frail from the herd. They found the stragglers, the sick, the elderly, pregnant women dragging exhausted children through the blistering sand. 2 million people stretched across the wasteland. The rear was utterly depleted. They had no strength left, no weapons, no capacity to defend themselves. Deuteronomy chapter 25 records it with devastating plainness. They attacked the rear, all who were faint and weary, and they did not fear God. That last phrase is the key. They did not fear God. Every other nation on earth looked at the wreckage of Egypt and chose self-preservation. This God is real. This God is dangerous. Amalek looked at the exact same evidence. They made a different calculation entirely. They were not confused about God's power. They were not ignorant of the Red Sea. They knew exactly who He was. And they attacked anyway. This was not a military engagement. This was defiance. Direct, violent, predatory terrorism committed against the defenseless in absolute defiance of a God they knew existed. That distinction matters. Amalek was not a nation that had not heard. Amalek was a nation that had heard, understood, and chose cosmic opposition. Now, look closer. There is a detail buried in the text. Most people miss it entirely. The Amalekite attack happens in Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. But look at verse 7, the verse immediately before the slaughter. The Israelites are camped at Rephidim. They are thirsty. They are quarreling with Moses. They are questioning God. They ask the question that would become the most dangerous question in their history. Is the Lord among us or not? The attack comes in the very next verse. In ancient Hebrew, letters hold numerical value. The system is called gematria. The numerical value of the Hebrew word Amalek is 240. The numerical value of the Hebrew word Safek, which means doubt, is also 240. They are numerically identical. This is not a coincidence. It is a coded theological signature, embedded in the text itself. The Amalekite spirit does not attack when you are strong. It does not attack when your faith is clear. It does not strike when your confidence in God is settled. It launches its ambush at the precise moment you begin to ask whether God is actually with you. The attack at Rephidim was not random. It was timed. Israel expressed doubt. Amalek appeared. The two things share the same numerical identity because they are spiritually the exact same thing. Doubt opens the gate. Amalek walks through it. God's response is recorded in verse 14. He does not simply command a counterattack. He makes a declaration. He tells Moses to write it down as a memorial. He will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Then he makes an oath. He swears by his own throne. He will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. This was not military policy. This was a cosmic verdict, delivered straight from the throne of the universe. Amalek looked at the living God. They understood who he was. They chose to slaughter the weakest of his people just to prove he could not protect them. The sentence was erasure. Total, permanent, generational erasure. The question was whether Israel would carry it out. 400 years passed. The wilderness generation died in the sand. Joshua fought Amalek. He partially subdued them, but he did not finish the command. The judges came and went. Blood soaked the land. Then Israel demanded a king. God gave them Saul, Saul of Benjamin, a man head and shoulders above every other man, anointed with oil, filled with the Spirit, the first king of the covenant nation. And God came to Saul with the bill, a bill that had been accumulating for 4 centuries. 1 Samuel chapter 15. The word of the Lord through the prophet Samuel is unambiguous. Go now and strike Amalek. Devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them. Kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. This was not a complex command. It required no interpretation. This was the 400-year-old verdict of Exodus 17, handed to the man with the authority and the army to finally execute it. Saul mobilized 210,000 soldiers. He marched against Amalek. He fought. He won. The Amalekite army was crushed under Israelite bronze. By any conventional military measurement, the campaign was a massive success. And then Saul compromised. He spared the Amalekite king, Agag. He spared the best of the livestock, the fat calves, the strong sheep, the things that were good and valuable. He refused to destroy. Only what was worthless and despised did he actually devote to destruction. The text records it with devastating irony. He kept the best, he killed the rest. He executed the letter of God's command where it cost him nothing. He ignored it exactly where it would have cost him something. But the detail that exposes Saul's true heart is not the sparing of Agag. It is what he did immediately afterward. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 12. Before the prophet Samuel can even reach him, Saul has already moved on. He goes to Carmel, and there he sets up a monument in his own honor. Read that carefully. Saul wins a battle in direct obedience to God. He partially executes the command. He spares a demonic king he was told to destroy. And then, while Agag's blood is still fresh on the sand, Saul sneaks off to erect a statue of himself. This was not confusion. This was not a battlefield judgment call made under pressure. This was a man who understood exactly what God wanted. He decided his own reputation mattered more. He used the victory to build his personal brand. He kept the enemy king alive. Agag was a human trophy, a prize to display to an admiring audience. Saul traded the approval of God for the applause of men. Samuel arrives. Saul greets him with a lie. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Samuel's response is one of the most devastating lines in the entire Old Testament. What, then, is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of oxen that I hear? The evidence of Saul's disobedience was audible. You cannot argue with livestock. The sound of compromise echoed across the camp. Samuel delivers the verdict that will define the rest of Saul's life. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. The kingdom is torn from Saul's hands in this exact moment. Not eventually, not conditionally, permanently. A decision made on a battlefield, a moment of ego-driven compromise. It forfeited the throne of Israel forever. But there is still Agag. Saul spared him. Saul could not bring himself to execute the divine verdict. Kings do not kill other kings in front of crowds if they want to be celebrated. Samuel has no such hesitation. He calls for Agag. The text records it without drama, without elaboration, without any of the emotional apparatus Saul required. Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. Not executed, not put to death, hacked to pieces, bone splintered, blood soaked the earth. Samuel understood what Saul refused to understand. You cannot negotiate with a cancer. You do not spare a root because the root looks manageable. You do not keep a demonic king alive because killing him in public feels uncomfortable. The command was total destruction for a reason. Partial obedience is not a lesser form of faithfulness. It is a different thing entirely. It is rebellion. Agag was dead. The threat appeared to be over, but Saul had waited too long. Between the victory and the execution, between God's command and Samuel's blade, something had been quietly, invisibly set in motion. A seed had been planted in the dark. It would not show its face for another 5 centuries. Fast forward to the end of Saul's story. The man who was anointed king is standing on Mount Gilboa, surrounded by Philistine armies. The battle has turned against him completely. His sons are dead. His army is broken. He is wounded by archers, bleeding out on a rocky hillside, watching everything he built collapse in a single afternoon. He asks his armor-bearer to run him through. He does not want the Philistines to capture him and make sport of his dying. The armor-bearer refuses. Saul falls on his own sword. The first king of Israel dies alone on a mountain, stripped of his army, stripped of his sons, stripped of the prophetic voice, stripped of the spirit that had anointed him, stripped of everything that once made him the most powerful man in the nation. A battlefield scavenger finds him. The man sees Saul is not quite dead. He deals the final blow. He strips the armor from the bleeding body. He takes the royal crown off the head of the fallen king. He brings the crown to David. David asks him where he is from. The man answers with 3 words that should stop every reader cold. I am an Amalekite. The exact enemy Saul refused to destroy came back. He stood over Saul's bleeding body. He stripped the crown from his head. The specific sin he chose to protect returned to finish what Saul started on Mount Gilboa. He did not die at the hands of a Philistine. He did not die by the sword of a rival Israelite. The final blow on the life of Saul of Benjamin was delivered by the people he had been specifically commanded to erase, the people he chose to spare because their king made a useful trophy. The terrifying poetry of God's justice does not require commentary. It simply requires observation. Saul refused to kill the Amalekites to protect his ego. The Amalekite spirit he kept as a trophy came back and stole his crown. The exact sin he refused to destroy became the exact instrument of his destruction. Not as a metaphor, not as a theological principle. Literally. An Amalekite stood over Israel's first king and stripped his crown while he was still dying. The lesson does not need to be explained. It needs to be felt. Do you see it? The thing you refuse to kill will not stay where you left it. It will not remain contained to the space you assigned it. It will grow in the dark. And it will come back for what you value most. Saul kept Agag. Years later, Agag's people were standing over Saul's body. The sin you spare today will not thank you for your mercy. It will use your mercy against you. After the death of Saul, the world moved on. David became king. Solomon built the Golden Temple. The kingdom split. The northern tribes fell to Assyrian war machines. Jerusalem stood, Jerusalem fell. The Babylonian Empire rose. The people of God were dragged into exile in heavy iron chains. Babylon fell to Persia. The Persians became the dominant power of the known world. Generations were born in captivity. They died in captivity. They were replaced by generations who had never seen the land their ancestors wept over. Through all of it, the Amalekites faded from the historical record. No more desert raids, no more rear attacks on stragglers. The name appeared less and less. The story of Saul and Agag faded into a dusty historical footnote. The nation had larger catastrophes to process. The world forgot about Amalek. But sin does not die of old age. It does not fade because nobody is paying attention to it. It does not dissolve into irrelevance just because the generation that created it is gone. The seed that Saul's disobedience planted, when he chose a trophy over obedience, when he kept the root alive because destroying it was inconvenient, that seed was still in the ground, silent, dark, patient. The root of Agag was festering in the shadows. 5 centuries passed. 5 centuries of empires rising and collapsing, of prophets warning and being ignored, of exiles and returns, partial rebuildings and compromised covenants. 5 centuries of the slow, grinding machinery of ancient history turning. While nobody watched the specific thing that Saul had refused to finish. And then the silence broke. It did not break quietly. It did not announce itself with a skirmish on a distant border. It was not a minor political incident that could be managed. When the dormant curse woke up after 5 centuries, it did not come for a tribe, or a village, or a military outpost. It came for every single Jewish man, woman, and child on the face of the earth, simultaneously, with a legal decree backed by the full administrative and military authority of the greatest empire in the known world. The Persian Empire, at its height, controlled 40% of the global population. Every road, every tax collector, every soldier, every governor. 40% of the human world answered to one throne. And someone had just convinced that throne to sign a death warrant, with every Jewish name on it. 5 centuries of silence had not killed the Amalekite spirit. 5 centuries had given it time to climb, to find the right corridors of power, to position itself at the right table, in the right palace, at the right moment in history, to wait until it could strike not with desert raids against stragglers, but with an empire behind it, and a royal seal on the paperwork. Saul thought he was dealing with a military enemy. He thought the worst-case outcome of his disobedience was a captured king and some livestock. He had no framework for understanding. The seed he refused to pull up in a desert camp in 1000 BC would spend 500 years growing roots. Roots deep enough to wrap around the throat of an entire civilization. The seed of Agag was awake, and when it opened its eyes in the courts of Persia, it was looking at a target Saul never imagined his disobedience could threaten. It was looking at the bloodline that would produce the Messiah. For centuries, nobody wrote down what happened to the descendants of Agag. After Samuel hacked him to pieces at Gilgal, the record goes quiet. No census, no genealogy, no historical footnote tracking the survival of his line through the violent upheavals of the following 500 years. It existed as a gap in the record, the kind of gap history produces when a story appears to be over. But God does not lose track of bloodlines. The book of Esther opens in the court of the Persian king Ahasuerus. Into that glittering court walks a man who will become the most dangerous human being in the ancient world. His name is Haman. He is the most powerful official in the Persian Empire, second only to the king himself. He has the ear of the most powerful monarch on earth. He has the resources, the authority, and the ambition to translate personal grievance into imperial policy. And he has a specific, consuming, irrational hatred for a specific Jewish man named Mordecai, a man who will not bow to him when he passes. The hatred is disproportionate from the beginning. Mordecai's refusal to bow is a personal insult. But Haman's response is not personal. Esther chapter 3 verse 6 records it perfectly. It seemed contemptible to Haman to lay hands on Mordecai alone. He wanted more. He decided to destroy all the Jews, all the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. From one man's refusal to bow to a royal decree for the simultaneous global genocide of an entire people, the escalation is not rational. It is not proportionate. It is something older and deeper than political calculation. Now, read Esther chapter 3, verse 1. Who was Haman? Haman the Agagite. Agagite, a direct descendant of King Agag, the very king that Saul kept as a pet 500 years earlier. The root that Saul refused to pull up in 1000 BC had spent 5 centuries growing in the dark. It had produced a man standing at the right hand of the Persian throne, with a pen in his hand, and a genocide decree in front of him. The decree goes out through every province of the Persian Empire. Esther chapter 3 verse 13. On a specific date, every Jewish man, woman, and child in every territory under Persian control is to be killed. Not displaced, not enslaved, annihilated. And their possessions are to be plundered by whoever carries out the execution. The edict is sealed with the king's ring. Under Persian law, a royal decree sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. It is permanent. It is legal. It has the machinery of the most powerful empire on earth behind it. Now follow the chain. If Haman's decree succeeds, the Jewish population of the Persian Empire is eradicated. The tribe of Judah is among them. If the tribe of Judah is eradicated, the bloodline of King David is cut off. If the bloodline of King David is cut off, the genealogical line that Matthew chapter 1 traces from Abraham through David, through the Babylonian exile directly to Joseph, the husband of Mary, is severed. And if that line is severed, Jesus Christ is never born. God was not being cruel in 1 Samuel 15. God was looking across the entire arc of history, from a vantage point that sees 500 years as clearly as 5 minutes. He was issuing a preemptive verdict on a bloodline that would one day stand in a Persian palace with a pen in its hand. A decree designed to erase the Messiah from human history. His command to destroy Amalek completely was not his harshest moment. It was his most merciful act toward humanity. The severity toward one nation was grace toward every nation that would ever need a Savior. And then, look at who God used to stop Haman. Esther chapter 2 verse 5. Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, from the family of Kish, the exact same tribal family as Saul, the son of Kish. God looked at Saul's catastrophic failure. He raised up a man from the exact same bloodline, from the exact same family, to stand in the gap that Saul's disobedience had opened. Same family, same enemy, 500 years later, different outcome. Mordecai did not spare Haman. Esther did not negotiate with the decree. The Agagite line was cut off in the courts of Persia by a Benjamite from the family of Kish, and a Jewish woman who was willing to risk her life to finish what Israel's first king refused to complete. God's correction of Saul's failure was surgical, generational, complete. But the ancient bloodline made one final attempt. Fast forward to Bethlehem. Jesus is born. Within months, a king issues an order for the mass slaughter of every male child in Bethlehem under the age of 2. His name is Herod. He is an Edomite. An Edomite. Amalek descended from Esau's grandson. Edom descended from Esau himself. Different branches, same root. The ancient enmity against the seed of the covenant people marched all the way from a desert ambush in Exodus 17 to a manger in Bethlehem, wearing a different name, but carrying the exact same spiritual signature. The blood feud that began when Amalek attacked the stragglers in the desert followed the messianic bloodline across 1,000 years. It tried one final time to cut it off at the source. It failed. The Lion of the tribe of Judah rose from the dead. The ancient blood feud ended. Its defeat was written permanently into human history. The blood dried. The ancient kings turned to dust. The physical empire of Amalek is dead, but the spirit is not. Now, look at your own life. You do not fight physical Amalekites with bronze and iron, but the Amalekite spirit is not a historical relic. It is a living, breathing entity. It is the pattern of the undealt with thing. It is the compromise you made and called mercy. The sin you are keeping alive because destroying it publicly feels uncomfortable. Keeping it privately feels manageable. You have an Agag chained in the back room of your mind, a pet sin, a useful trophy. You are not ready to pay the painful, bloody social cost of actually finishing the job God gave you. Look at Saul. Saul did not think he was making a catastrophic decision. He thought he was being reasonable. He thought he was exercising highly nuanced judgment in a complex situation. He looked at the command of God and decided it was too harsh, too absolute. He thought the gap between what God commanded and what he actually did was small enough not to matter. He kept one king. He spared some livestock. He built a stone monument to make himself feel like the gap did not exist, to silence the quiet conviction in his chest. Saul thought he was being merciful to Agag. He was not being merciful. He was being unfaithful. He called his own rebellion nuance. He called his own disobedience grace. He weaponized his own ego and disguised it as compassion. And his unfaithfulness to a command that felt excessive nearly cost the entire human race its savior. 500 years later, the compromise stood in a Persian palace with a pen, writing death warrants for the Jews. The sin you refuse to kill today will hunt your children tomorrow. You cannot negotiate with a cancerous spirit. It will grow and return stronger, weaponizing your mercy against you. What are you keeping alive in secret? The Amalekite spirit feeds on doubt and targets the exhausted and isolated. But the finished work of Jesus is a cosmic victory over all demonic forces. Jesus didn't negotiate. He crushed the enemy. Through his blood, You have the authority to destroy Amalekite strongholds with decisive obedience, not compromise. The same God who preserved the messianic bloodline is watching your story. Type "no compromise" in the comments and let the enemy know the Amalek in your life ends today.